I've done it! It's my podcast now, where I pick the topic and the music and everything. I have the power!
Oh, hey there, Rana. Mind if I record the intro?
By all means, yes. I was just testing the microphone for you, the microphone we don't share.
Okay, then. Well, folks, it's been another full travel around the sun for one of us. It's time for us to celebrate one more year of craziness. I mean, Ranakel. Welcome to the Music Arcade. Rana, it's your birthday. You go ahead and start this one.
Welcome, everybody, to Music Arcade. I'm Ranakel.
I'm Galen, the SoundGuy Firestone.
And I'm Eddie, and why does the script tell me to kneel before the mighty French duck right now?
I mean, you're the one who wrote it, you tell me.
You vastly overestimate our preparation. But yes, I happen to have a birthday as time of recording in a week, as time of posting even sooner, and so I decided to flex my authority, just like we did for that Dancing Mad episode months before.
That we never actually did.
Exactly!
Okay.
We're professionals, goddammit.
Well, for this one, you have brought us a game that has long been on my to-do list that I have just never gotten around to, and I keep meaning to.
Yeah, and it just so happens to be the best video game on the 3DS.
Bold claim,
Period.
there's some really good ones on there.
Yeah, but this one has such a mix of charm and amount of content that I can't help but love it. And it also happens to have at the soundtrack just Masahiro Sakurai flexing the connections he's made with Smash and other projects, and decided, hey, you absolute all-star crew, wanna make music for my game?
And
we end up with Masafumi Takada and Motoi Sakuraba and Yuzo Koshiro and
Mitsuda.
Yes, Mitsuda. And on a project with a very unique and very engaging soundtrack that I've wanted to talk about for a while. And now I just get to.
Now you just get to. So Kid Icarus Uprising is one of those games that, like, I don't think it sold super well, and, like, it's one of those games that everyone kind of talks about. It kind of reminds me, and this is going to be a weird comparison until I explain it, of the HBO TV show The Wire. Because it's one of those things that everyone professes to love, but very few people seem to have actually played.
Yeah, I think part of it is that it's a single revival of a series that was 25 years old since its last installment. And part of it was that more than being about the game itself, the fact that it launched was more the story of the 3DS as a whole. Because the launch lineup for the 3DS was bad.
I remember.
A barren landscape for like a year, and then this came out, and then a Fire Emblem came out, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I didn't even get my own 3DS until Link Between Worlds came out, so that was, what, 2 years into it or so?
Yeah, and there's a reason my 3DS has the Elysian crest on it. Because I cracked during the launch of Fire Emblem, and I certainly don't regret it.
Honestly, based on the gameplay videos you shared with us pre-recording, the game also feels like it's a lot about Nintendo. Because there are references to Mario, it has more Metroids than an actual Metroid game.
Yeah.
It's only missing a Pokeball somewhere.
I'm sure it's in there somewhere. But then again, I mean, no, I don't want to say that. Game Freak kind of pretends they're a second-party company, but they're not actually owned by Nintendo.
Indeed.
They just release most of their stuff for, you know, Nintendo platforms, but even that's not universal because Pokemon Go is mobile, obviously. And then there was that one game they made, Tembo the Badass Elephant, which was a super hard OG platformer, which I think that came out on Steam. So yeah.
Yeah, and I deeply appreciate that even when they go, we are the Kirby guys and we are those big franchise kind of caretakers, they still allow themselves to try and get a bit experimental.
Yeah.
And it's not always a glorious success, but I still appreciate that on a fundamental level. Speaking of experimental, this game's control scheme, I must mention it because it's also a throwback to another Nintendo era. See, with one hand, you move the direction pad and press the L button. With another hand, you can use the stylus to aim and move the camera. And with another hand, you can support your 3DS because otherwise you are just holding it with an edge. Yes, that's 3 hands. That's a throwback to the N64 era when you think about it.
I was wondering where you were going with that. Now that makes sense.
And that's why they actually sold the game when it released, with a special stand in order to replace one of your hands.
Oh, that's not a good sign when the game requires a physical peripheral to actually play.
Yeah.
I'm now starting to understand some of this game's sales difficulties.
I know, right?
Shame on me for not having a third arm.
Right?
Messed up. But anyway, let's start talking a bit about the music, and at the same time about something Eddie mentioned, which is that we have our music playlist in order to have points of reference for what we are talking about. And this time I joined some gameplay videos corresponding to each of the music, and there's a very good reason for that, because the way a lot of the tracks are composed is very atypical.
Yes.
Because half the levels, more or less, are linear corridor shooters. And as a result, the music knows exactly where you're going to be at what point the music happens, and so they play a lot with that, in ways that don't necessarily make sense when the music stands alone, but when paired with the visuals and with the conversations and with the events that are happening in the level, make for something that's more or less cinematic, yet with video game sensibilities. And so the first example of that is more or less the level version of the main game theme, The Return of Palutena, in which you are just thrown in the wild, like you get the main menu and the video, then you start the game, you run 2 steps and you're already flying and already shooting at things while you vaguely get tutorial info.
Oh dear. Not the biggest fan of being thrown into the deep end, but it feels like this game could probably pull it off from what I saw from the gameplay video. There's a lot of harp on this one. This one just goes hard on the harp.
And that's very important, because that's not the case on the later levels, and there will be a very good reason for that, which gives context to the harp. The harp is kind of Palutena's leitmotif instrument.
Makes sense,
It's there to show her presence, and it makes sense to have picked that, because it's a very divine influenced weapon, and when you're playing an angel in service of a goddess, of light no less, harp just makes sense.
It does. It does. It's meant to be cherubic. I did notice that while this one is credited to both Sakuraba and Mitsuda, Sakuraba doesn't appear to come in until about a minute into the track, is when some of his compositional quirks start existing. It
makes sense because, again, with the linear travel time, it can... I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if each composer didn't have a hand on the entire track, but, like, went with a little bit of a back and forth.
It feels that
the
way.
different movements of the track, if you will.
It does feel that way, very much so. And that's in part of what you were saying before, that it's kind of a linear corridor shooter experience with very specific timing, so you can do that to time it with the level, which appears to be a lot of what's occurred, and we're going to be talking about that later for sure. One other note that I had is that at about 140, it changes again, and this becomes a song that I feel like wouldn't sound out of place in Pokemon.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, there's this bit of a childish victory feeling.
Yeah.
Which again makes sense because Pete is... he's a brave boy. He's very head empty, doing the right thing wherever it's pointed at, and he's lovable but not very smart, let's just say.
I got that impression from the gameplay videos you showed, yes. I know very
that
little
sounds
about this character, given that I don't play Prince of Persia. I don't play Kid Icarus, and I don't play Smash Brothers. Where did I get Prince of Persia from?
I don't know. You lost me
no
there.
I lost myself
I have no idea,
so...
but the devs are French.
But yeah, no, there's definitely this feeling of valiance, but not bravado, of like a victory in the making.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a march forward and a very nice reinterpretation of the first stage theme from the original game.
Yeah, I thought to myself that I've heard this one before, and I'm sure, a version of this before at least, and I'm sure it's either like a remix on OC remix of the original, or even just the Smash Brothers version or something. But this song definitely is in my head somewhere, so it's not like unknown to me.
Yeah, and the fact that it has this ascension feeling to it matched what was the gameplay at the time, because it was an action platformer on the NES, but instead of going forward, for this section anyway, you went up. There was a screen wrap all around, and you just went up, and the music kind of accompanied that.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives, on this reinterpretation, this feeling of ascension and of pushing you forward in the air. Overall, nice stuff, and a nice way to get thrown into the mix with a bang. Now then, let's move on to the next track, which is a character theme this time.
Yeah.
Because it's not all linear shooters. There's essentially a flying section that lasts up to 5 minutes due to low reasons. If it lasts longer than that, Pete swings burn. And once that's done, you take the second part of the mission on the ground. Generally, you have the level theme and then the boss theme. But for the second mission, you also have a helping ally with Magnus.
I can't believe he's not played by Steve Bloom. Am I wrong?
No,
he looks
isn't.
like a pretty stereotypical Steve Bloom character, right?
Oh yeah, no, he definitely does.
If it looks like Wolverine, he looks like a Steve Bloom character, and
Exactly.
he looks like Wolverine with a sword.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, Dude with a Sword has a bit of a history when it comes to not quite this game, but close enough. I believe it was on a preview Smash tournament in an official Nintendo event, maybe a pre-release thing, and there was some color commentary because it's a Nintendo official stuff. There were also items including assist trophies. And so on the very first showing, the color commentators show one of the players unleash an assist trophy in Smash, which was an assist trophy of Magnus hitting people with a sword, except Kid Icarus Uprising isn't that widely known, so they were just briefly confused before saying excitedly, "It's dude with a sword! Oh, dude with a sword! He's my favorite!"
Oh boy. Oh boy.
I have to admit being a little surprised there were at some point Nintendo sanctioned Smash tournaments given how much they hate that scene these days.
No, they hate Melee.
Oh.
That's not the same.
Oh, well, the articles I read gave the impression that they hated all Smash. Never mind.
I mean, maybe they do, especially since then, but I think it's more that they hate Smash that isn't happening right under their direct control.
And Melee has a big following, that tracks.
Yeah. But for all the improvised clumsiness of that anecdote, the fact is that dude with a big sword is kind of Magnus's main characteristic, which is, in the context of the game, impressive, because there are these angels going down fighting the armies of the underworld, there's gods battling it up, and there's just this dude that matches speed with you. And the theme, of course, reflects that level of mundane heroism, of human determination.
Yeah. I mean, it's got a bunch of string sweeps, it's got a bunch of horns. It's not really what I'm used to at a Koshiro, but, you know, it sells what it's trying to sell.
Yeah, it's not the most Koshiro of tracks in this OST, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll talk about the most Koshiro tracks for certain. But yeah, no, that's very much about the character, and it works well to kind of change the tone, especially given the track that came before about this entry on the grounds of Dark Lord Gao. And he comes as backup, not necessarily somebody that even gets you out of direct trouble, but somebody that is there to help and to remind you in a way of what you as an angel is supposed to fight for, because you are nominally on the side of humanity.
I think my opinion on the track itself is a bit more muted, because like I appreciate the orchestration, and it does its job really well as a theme for a big human warrior gloriously being able to fight against demons that supposedly humans shouldn't be able to fight against.
Yes.
At least not on their own.
Exactly.
But like, I felt like I've heard similar themes in a dozen other games or anime. It's
Yeah.
a bit of an average Japanese triumphant warriors theme.
Yeah, no, that's
is.
fair. It's pretty generic. In fact, to the point where on the lead up to the stage, they kind of riff on the fact that it's the second stage and you're already going on a story about a brave hero needed to defeat the Dark Lord. And they are very much playing off on that cliche.
Yeah, I definitely like this one, but it doesn't set the world on fire, that's for sure.
Yes, it doesn't really break new ground, and I think that's on purpose.
It seems that way, yeah.
Yes. What is definitely more unusual is the next track.
This song is wild.
Yeah,
I like to
Pandora's
call-
Labyrinth of Deceit.
Yeah, I like to call this one Sakuraba's Labyrinth of Deceit, because that synth was a thing.
You say that, but while there is some Sakuraba weirdness, I feel the weirder part I will attribute to Masafumi Takada.
Yeah, this didn't really feel like a Sakuraba to me too much. I mean, I could hear his influence in there, but the composition was a little too all over the place. He has like this prog rock background that he always relies on. This is not that.
Yes.
To me,
That's
kind of
in
felt
part because any progression you would have in the level is occasionally stop and start that I appreciate more than the both of you combined and then some. but that's justified in gameplay because you face in parts some literal Wile E. Coyote moments.
Yeah.
And you're just going down a corridor and suddenly the level is painted on a wall you were about to crash into.
Yeah, I get that vibe as well. The thing I got with this piece was that it felt like Takada did sort of the intro and outro, let's say, the whole orchestral bit, and Sakuraba just threw his synth solo in the middle, just cause. Incidentally, the orchestrated bit, it reminds me of a different composer, one called Kaoru Wada. Wada, I am not 100% familiar with his work, and spoilers, this is only the first of a few composers that the soundtrack reminded me of. But it specifically reminded me of his work in the anime, and here's a title for you: Record of Lodoss War, Chronicles of the Heroic Knight. Because apparently long titles are the Lodoss War trademark or something.
Sure.
Fun fact, there is a light novel that is only its title, and it's 173 pages long.
And then there's a bunch of spin-offs with long subtitles.
Yeah.
But it reminded me a lot of his compositions for that anime, because it has a lot of, not just this track, but this was the first one I noticed it a lot. It has a big focus on the brass when it goes into the orchestral bit.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a trademark for that anime soundtrack in my mind. It's the songs I remember from that series are always either the ones with Latin chant in the middle for whatever reason, or the ones with big brass energy, as I believe the kids call it.
Fair.
But it's a cool track.
It goes places. It even has like kind of crushed down, corrupted versions of the main menu theme. And it has that stop and start. It has also that more retro sound that matches the visuals, which are basically, after 4 levels of the game, we're like, okay, we know this looks like Star Fox. Here, have something that looks even more like Star Fox now.
You were totally playing Star Fox for a chunk of this one. Star Fox where you're shooting Metroids too, which I thought was amazing.
Exactly.
I was about to say, let's just quote what Galen said on our Discord, that it's in a Kid Icarus game, you're beating Metroids while you're playing Star Fox.
Exactly.
And I just put cool at me after that, because, like, what else can I say? That's just cool.
Yeah. Also, it deserves mention that while the Star Fox part is new, Metroids were also in the original Kid Icarus.
I did not know that. So, when I was listening to this song on its own, it was a miserable experience. I am like, just want to slap something. But then I watched the gameplay video, and it all clicked into place.
Thank you, that vindicates me putting the gameplay video on the side.
Absolutely, because if you had just given me this song, I would have been like, what is this garbo? What are you doing to me? But having seen the gameplay video and how, like, this is a real test case for scoring versus songwriting. You're not writing the song in a vacuum, you're writing it to a specific set piece, and in the context of the set piece, the song works wonderfully. Its jankiness is a feature, not a bug. It's just terrible to listen to on the soundtrack because it's not edited together. It's just playing the level version. But in the context, like, all of these wacky scene changes and all of the like deliberate stops and starts are reflected in the music, and that makes the music work.
Exactly. Couldn't have put it better myself. That's the music serving the purpose of the level, and that's the most apparent in this track.
Absolutely. And I love it for it. I just never want to listen to it without the gameplay again. Because, man, that was gross.
I didn't have that much issue with this track, but I did have that with one that's coming up in a bit.
Oh, looking forward.
Spoilers.
Fair enough.
All the more reason to move forward to another character theme that's also a level theme, which is Dark Pit. And which is Sakuraba being his most Sakuraba in the soundtrack.
I disagree with that
notes
statement
here.
strenuously.
Yeah. I have my episode notes for this one, and for this song in particular, it's just 4 words. So I would like to quote them directly.
By all means.
And those words are, "Love them Spanish guitars."
Right? Oh, yeah, no. This one, the intro is like Shades of Gerudo.
Yes.
Which...
the intro, which is Dark Pit's character theme, basically you have that on the level, and then there are 2 other versions of that theme in the game. And maybe that's because I have this point of comparison that I didn't like, that it feels very much more to me that this is the Sakuraba source added to this existing base of Dark Pit's theme.
Because, his synth does come in at points, but, it's not obtrusive, and he's got that really good bass line that he's so good at. But one thing, I wrote in my notes, very happy he manages not to lose the plot. He keeps coming back to the main hook and landing it, which...
Yes.
This was... I will come to a conclusion about this in a later song of his, but, I really appreciate this one. It's a very complete song, which is something that Sakuraba has not been good at lately.
Yeah, and I agree with the fact that it definitely goes somewhere. And that somewhere is interesting because in spite of the caricatural name Dark Pit, which they don't even always use in the game, it's more than just Pit, but it's evil. The more fun part being that the ever-assumed reliable goddess Palutena that guides you throughout the stages assumes very much that simplified Pit, but is evil, and he kind of proves himself in very interesting way, because he is created by breaking a magical mirror in the previous stage, but what defines Pit is not the goodness of his heart so much as his loyalty to his goddess, and as a result the dark reflection of that is Dark Pit's fierce independence. And I feel that the Spanish guitar very much wild theme, and even the wild Sakurabaisms help sell the independent part of his character.
I had a comment and it's gone.
No, sure.
I can go ahead with mine.
Go ahead.
I'd say the Spanish guitars do give a bit of not necessarily independent feeling, but a free sort of thing,
Yes.
a free flowing, a free going thing.
It almost feels Western-ish.
Kinda. I think this is a weird case that goes kind of against most of this soundtrack, in that most of the soundtrack to this game sounds weird in isolation, but in the context of the stage, it sounds perfect for the stage. To me, this track, at least in this stage in particular, where Dark Pit first starts attacking you, it sounds almost too freeing, almost too careless, let's say, with the Spanish guitars. So it sounds amazing to listen to this one, independent of the gameplay.
Yes.
But with the gameplay, it kind of feels a little bit off to me, because it doesn't really feel like matches the personality that Dark Pit has at this point in the game. I've seen
Yeah, because at this point he's very much more antagonistic than he is at later point.
Exactly, he's kind of aggressive towards the
Towards
player
everyone,
character.
honestly, even
Yeah,
Medusa.
pretty much. So it
She's
kinda,
like, hey, I like your dark vibe, you should work for me, and he's like, nah, I'm good.
It should work for me. Nah, screw you.
Anyways, I do have one thing to add. And I don't know if this is intentional, but given that Motoi Sakuraba is an infamous rock guy, it might be. So once upon a time, there was a Swedish death metal band called Dark Tranquillity. We've talked about them briefly in the past, specifically with Metal Hellsinger, and then further back with Soul Nomad.
Can I just note that I love when you start your stories with Once Upon a Time and then go into heavy metal story.
Right? Well, I mean, this was kind of Once Upon a Time.
Like
they formed in the 90s, and this was what I'm about to talk about. It's one of their earliest albums, specifically their second album, The Gallery, which is kind of considered the forefather of melodic death metal as a whole. And there's a 2-part song on The Gallery. Mine is the Grandeur of Melancholy Burning, which is a terrible title, I gotta be honest. But the first...
It's a bit extra.
It's a bit extra, isn't it?
I usually expect that level of word salad from Japanese bands.
Right? They get a lot better over the 30 years of their career. They're still going, by the way. Anyway, so the first half of this, which is the Mine is the Grandeur part, is actually very similar compositionally. It's a lot of, like, acoustic and Spanish guitar. Instead of jazz drum, they have something closer to a timpani. But I find myself reminded of this instrumental intro to this song in no small way with Dark Pit. And I don't know if that's intentional or not, or just my brain drawing comparisons that aren't there, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
That is not a song of theirs I'm familiar with, because I haven't done a Discog dive into Dark Tranquillity.
It's old. This was like 99 or 2001. This is ancient.
Yeah, I might do some research when we're not recording and get back to you with results later on, because now I'm curious.
Fair enough.
And me too. But I can definitely see that there could be external influences that help kind of reinforce that character, but at the same time, I fully understand the point that this isn't as constructed as some of the other rail shooter track, because it is at the same time a character theme and a level theme. Also, I believe this is one of the tracks where there is no harp, because it's not about you.
Yep.
It's about the other guy.
I don't remember there being much harp in Pandora.
Maybe during the part that apes the main menu.
Oh, okay.
Aha! But yeah, let's move on next to the Seafloor Palace.
This is the one where the experience of listening to this without the gameplay really hurt it for me.
I'm with Eddie on this one. I don't think I liked this one too much.
Yeah, that first transition, it kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere if you listen to this on a vacuum. I wanted that Egyptian-ish sound to last longer, but it stops all of a sudden and goes into something completely different. It's like a Monty Python episode where it just goes, and now for something completely different, and just changes the music.
I have good news and bad news for you.
Uh-oh.
The good news is that the first part of the track, when you are flying over the desert, is actually a version of the second stage of the original Kid Icarus, where you are traveling through the overworld. The bad news is that the desertic influences are very much an addition of this track specifically. And the original isn't an overworld theme at all. Well, it isn't a desert theme at all because it's another world theme. It's still very good, but it does really feel like they were trying to find a way to fit the Overland theme because it isn't anywhere else, and they kind of needed to tick that check mark and decided to have some fun with it for sure, but only for like 1 minute.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know about this one. I feel like I was spoiled by the Pandora's Labyrinth theme. This feels not as strong by comparison, just in general.
For the second movement's defense, it is very extra and maybe a bit short to really settle in, but if you're going to put something extra and almost too proud for its own sake, you might as well do it during the Parting of the Seas. That's a classic move.
Yeah, I kind of like how the second movement started. I think it started with a very interesting... Well, because of my past experiences with gaming, the vibe I got was sort of a piratey vibe. Because it reminded me of some stuff from Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah. It does eventually kind of mellow off a little bit.
It's
pirate
kind of like
vibe, though.
There is the hook of the second movement that like and the rest is kind of trained to be an accessory for that high note and doesn't really match.
I hope everyone listening has their Ranakel bingo cards ready, because this is the Ranakel
special.
special.
I was going to do it at some point.
You should see the waveform I'm looking at right now in Pro Tools, by the way. That looks wild.
This is the Ranakel Power Hour.
It really is. Well, I mean, that's the point.
I mean, that's the episode's point.
Yeah.
Sue me. And I definitely agree that there is a hard turn, and there is this main high point at an awkward moment, and the rest is kind of trading behind.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. I don't hate this one, but I have a better song from... a more interesting song from this very list to compare it to, and it just falls short in that regard. This isn't bad, it's just underwhelming.
Yeah. I think its biggest...
And underwater. This does not sound like an underwater theme. If I didn't see the gameplay video, I would not have called that.
That's another check mark for the Ranakel bingo cards.
But to be fair, the water is receded. Thanks, Poseidon.
I do think at the end of the day, for me, the biggest flaw in this track is that it doesn't commit enough to the ideas that I find to be cool, which are the first movement with the Egyptian stuff, and the start of the second movement with the pirate vibes, and it doesn't commit enough to that idea. And
there's definitely. There's no more Egyptian stuff, but there are more piratey songs later on. But I didn't include that because we already talked about that in Music Arcade. And it's Space Pirates, no less.
One last comment. And this is me being probably pandering at least to Eddie, who admittedly doesn't like JRPGs, but this one's relevant to this situation. And that is this. We have a game with an ocean palace and Yasunori Mitsuda on the soundtrack, and my brain is immediately going to that one instead. Because that song is an all-timer, the Ocean Palace from Chrono Trigger. That one's an all-timer. And
Yeah, but it's generally a bad sign when you're listening to a song in context and think, I wish I was listening to this other song instead.
It's not a good sign, no.
Yeah.
This is like one of the only two songs on this list where that happened, by the way. Like, everything else really kept my attention, but this one just, I'm like, I would rather be listening to Ocean Palace from Chrono Trigger right now.
Yeah, but I felt compelled to list this song because, first, the few seconds of early Parting of the Seas is something
Oh
that
yeah,
I
that
really
intro is
love.
wonderful. I wish the
And
rest of the
that-
song kept up, but that intro is great.
Exactly. But they're not all pure perfect bangers, and I'm perfectly okay with that.
Yeah, no, there's nothing wrong with that. Having a
Yeah.
negative or neutral opinion is totally valid. You know, we don't want to only talk about the best stuff. Lord knows we complain enough about stuff we don't like.
Exactly.
Remember the anime episode where I deliberately picked 2 songs I didn't like?
Oh boy, those were the days.
Yeah. Now, these first 5 songs are only part of the second act of the game. There are like 4 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Because basically they go, here's 9 levels and eventually you fight and you defeat Medusa like in the first game. Congrats, here are some end credits. Oh, why is somebody ripping the end credits apart? Uh-oh. And then you fight new antagonists now that they've settled you in and got you comfortable with what you expected already for the game, which is fight Medusa's return. And the result is one of the new antagonists being Viridi, the goddess of nature, and her all-organic weapons of mass destruction, the Reset Bombs, as depicted in Wrath of the Reset Bomb by Yuzo Koshiro, which is a very Yuzo Koshiro track.
This one's
essentially a Lost Actuator track, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I get that
You're not
vibe a
wrong.
lot. I didn't have much to say about this. It is a very cinematic sound, and it heads to what sounds like the main theme at 325, but I may have gotten that one wrong.
Let me give it a listen.
Yep. It at least heads to a familiar theme. Maybe it's not the main theme, maybe I shortcutted my notes on that one.
Main theme, I'm not sure.
It's a very
starts
familiar
around
progression
3.
that I feel like is part of this, so maybe it's a remix. Maybe it's a remix of another part of the original Kid Icarus soundtrack that I'm just not connecting with for some
It
reason.
does sound like it's probably a remix from something from the NES. It starts at 320, I think.
Yeah.
And it's a very simple melody like you would hear in the NES
Okay, so
days.
then it's probably a completely different remix, and I just am wrong as to what is being remixed. But
But
Honestly,
yeah, there's definitely
you-
influences of past elements. I like many of those tracks. Yet they don't get stale, and I think that's a pretty big achievement
oh yeah,
for remaking a game, well, following up on a game that had a very small soundtrack in the end.
Yeah, I'll be honest with this one. I think Galen said he didn't have much to say, but his talk about this bit that reminded him of something was more than I have to say for this track. It sounds nice.
yeah. It's got a very
I-
cinematic sound. I like it.
Yeah,
I have more to say about the concept behind the stage than I do about the song, because it's the goddess of nature and her weapon are reset bombs that are built in a factory. Goddess of
Yeah,
nature, everyone.
exactly. Very much so. And that's part of why she's so antagonistic, at least at this point of the game. And it's an interesting counterpoint, if only to the antagonists and not even fight the armies on the underworld. They actually commit to that. The enemies you face are completely different on the ground and flying levels. And yeah, that's a nice touch through this stage that, of course, given that it's Koshiro as he's Koshiro, does get some Star Wars-like touches.
Well, I have some comments about the next song that I'm looking forward to sharing, Lunar Sanctum. We'll wait till we get to that one, but you mentioned Star Wars, and I'm like, I have a point to make whenever you're
I
ready.
feel like the point you want to make is basically the same I want to make, so why not jump to that track?
All right.
Okay.
That's No Moon.
All right, that is No Moon, except, so here's a context that I would not have actually gotten if not for a completely random, lucky event a couple of months back. So, a couple of months ago, I'm just got my motorcycle back. and I'm looking to go see some movies. And Bullet Train is out, and I'm like, I should go see Bullet Train. Let's see what it's playing. And I noticed while I was looking at movie times, wow, Fathom Events is doing a 40th anniversary of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan.
Oh.
Which was composed by James Horner. And I'm like, I need to go see this in theater. When am I going to get a chance to do this? So I go to the Regal at the Dole Cannery and I see this. So that soundtrack was actually like very much in my head. So for Lunar Sanctum, I'm like, yeah, there's some Return of the Jedi elements, sure. But there is a much bigger James Horner connection because while I'm listening to this song, it kept trying to go back to the Wrath of Khan main theme. And I realized, wait a minute, he's actually taking inspiration from Horner here. Which is kind of a rare take, and I kind of adore it.
That sounds like something he'd do, because it's another Yuzo Koshiro track.
Yeah.
And he likes his interesting influences, and he, in his interviews in particular, really shows that he has a bit of an engineer mindset in his composition. And that shines through nicely. So him having old sci-fi influences makes perfect sense and serves really well a track when you are ascending towards a celestial body that shoots giant lasers at you.
Yeah.
Also a brief musical number.
I kind of feel like an idiot because my point was just John Williams.
That's cool too.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that in there.
Koshiro being Koshiro.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just enjoy the very few Star Wars influences in a stage that starts with "That's No Moon," and where you're running across an equatorial trench in a very sci-fi-esque base on space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So of course it would have Star Wars influences in its track.
Yeah, it kind of can't not. Admittedly, it was more like the Return of the Jedi influences, but a lot of these like string sweeps and the way it continually transitions between the villain theme and the main theme back and forth is very James Horner Star Trek 2. Like, I would not have had the context for this on the forefront of my brain if I didn't have the incredible opportunity to see Star Trek 2 a couple of months ago in theaters and have that in my brain. So I really lucked out on being able to have this take. But it's so clearly there if you know what to listen for. And I am so here for it because it's like, yeah, every one of their kid sister references John Williams. We're going to be talking about that in Now Playing for sure. But, not other composers quite so often, so I'm glad to see someone else get some love.
And on top of that, in the context of the game, I really appreciate that layered on top of those references, this is way more than just a little reference soup. It also really shifts the tone around between the previous track, which was you being, for the last 2 or 3 chapters, on the defensive from the attack of the forces of nature, to now you leading the charge and being on the offensive and actually taking the fight to them. And it really drives that forward with a more warlike tone, even within the generally very belligerent drums that Yuzo Koshiro employs. It's a very nicely tied together track.
Yeah.
With, again, that weird musical intro that makes no sense unless you hear also Pete's dorkily singing on top of it.
Which is left out of the soundtrack version, unfortunately. I like this one a lot for a whole lot of reasons. This is probably my favorite song. It's either this one or the next one. Like, there are 2 really good ones. Or maybe Dark Pit. I don't know. This was one of them that really kept my attention. I like this one a lot.
Alright, then. Let's move on to the next track, which happens again right after, because you've taken a win, but that doesn't mean things have settled down.
Nope.
With Lightning Battle.
Sakuraba in full rock mode. This is the Sakuraba song.
I would like to once again quote directly from my notes. And
By
this
all
time
means.
it's just one word. And that word is bass. I
There's-
like
yeah.
the bass line.
That bass line is really good. So I'm going to quote from my notes here. And that is, and I quote, okay, Sakuraba's full rock, lots of guitars. Chance of prog rock murder equals high. Cool synth with the guitars, I like it. Man, I miss this Sakuraba. Where has he been the last 10 years? And it occurred to me at some point that I have more or less completely lost faith in Motoi Sakuraba, which is really a shame because I do like his work when he's good. But the fact that my first instinct was, all right, well, this song starts good, but I know murder is coming. He is about to kill the hell out of this song. Just go off on a prog rock tangent and kill it. He didn't. So this one's actually like Sakuraba harkening back to that one like weird rock track in Valkyrie Profile 2, or even further back a couple of tracks from Tales of Destiny 1, where he's just going for it, and it sounds great.
Yeah, for a track with battle in the title, it really has this big fight energy right from the get-go, which makes sense because for the 13 previous levels, you have the same like 3-second intro of Pete walking out of the dark inside of the divine sanctum and flying out of the door. And this time, he starts to dive it and recalls because he isn't even outside of the door that there's already lightning shooting and lasers being right at his face. And that is then supported by the hardest guitar being shot in the very first moments.
It's like, here's what you're getting into. Enjoy.
Yeah.
And it really plays.
Also, what's interesting is that there's definitely a boss vibe to this level theme, and that's kind of because part of this track isn't fully about you. You're still there, but Phosphora, which is the antagonist for this level, Goddess of Thunder employed by Viridi, is having her boss fight while you having your level. And,
that's awesome.
That's why it's very busy but not messy. It's a 3-part conflict with nature, the underworld, and you. And it just fires on all cylinders and keep this fight energy that starts messy, and as the track progresses, especially around the turning point where she actually wins a boss fight, then gets into more of a challenge me if you can tone to it. And it's just those kind of progression that this game offers in a way very few other video games offered.
Yeah.
Which makes this soundtrack very unique. And
absolutely.
It's part of why I love it so much.
100%.
And then, of course, there's a whole storm around, and there's parts that are calmer because a storm has an eye and you have to kind of pay homage to it. That's part of the requirements for that kind of theme.
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of what kind of reins Sakuraba in just the little bit he needs to be to not go full prog.
I mean, if that's what it takes, it worked really well. Like, I don't know. I feel like these problems started sporadically. Like I mentioned Valkyrie Profile 2. There's another song in Valkyrie Profile 2 that, once again, starts really good. I think it plays somewhere in the Seraphic 8. It starts really good and then just goes off a cliff. And he's had this habit of every once in a while doing that. I feel like it happens more these days than then, especially with his remixes.
Yes.
The fact that this one kind of hits that sweet spot where he can really play around with the guitars but doesn't lose the plot is actually, like, really incredible. The fact that I fully expected him to lose the plot, mentioned that in my notes, and it just never happened, is very surprising and also very saddening because, to be clear, I do generally like the guy. A lot of his work is really solid, but just not lately.
Yeah, and I think part of that is tied to an extract from an interview I saw recently about how basically the time he takes to compose and have the base of a song is like 2 hours, which isn't enough for me to like shop for my groceries.
No.
And so that makes sense that sometimes the idea in his head feels better than what it ends up being for the listener.
Yeah.
But sometimes you strike gold.
Sometimes you strike gold.
That's a big oof.
Honestly, his contributions to this soundtrack are pretty much, at least what you've shown off, universally gold. So, someone was keeping him in line. I don't know who the music director is, but someone was like cracking the whip on him. And
He was the music director, I think.
What the hell? Where has this Motoi Sakuraba been the last decade? Come on, come back to us. We deserve better than this. I'm still furious about Tales of Arise.
Let me double check for what VGMDB says. Orchestra, production stuff. Oh, never mind. Producer, Yasunori Mitsuda.
Oh, that makes so much more sense. Mitsuda is a very tight composer. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
And that kind of explains why he has composed and arranged few tracks compared to a lot of the more prevalent contributors in this soundtrack. Like the only one we'll cover that he had a hand on is Palutena's Return.
Okay, all right. So that makes a lot more sense. If Sakuraba was in charge of this and came out this tight, I'd be like, what? I don't understand where this guy has been. But the fact that Mitsuda was the guy in charge and apparently running a very tight ship, that makes so much more sense. So yeah, okay.
Yes, the world is right side up.
Okay, good, yes. I mean, again, the fact that over the last 10 years or so, Sakuraba's best work was either Dark Souls, which is completely different from anything he's done, so he had less room to experiment, or Tales of Zestiria, which was co-composed by Goshina, says a lot.
Yeah, he's one of those people that gains at not being on his own. And now for something completely different again. Because that's the track from the next level, right? And suddenly another antagonist happens in the middle of your climactic fight against the forces of nature. And you have aliens.
Because at this point, why not? This game is what would happen if Taro Yoko was a sane and well-adjusted individual.
Honestly, I was just gonna make a Giorgio Tsoukalos joke, but yours is better. That's the Ancient Aliens guy for those in the audience who don't get it.
Yeah, no, suddenly geometric aliens and the first part of the level is basically all the previous allies and antagonists going, they're not my guys.
Don't steal my kills.
I, once again, have to read from my notes, so this is going to explain basically everything about my opinion of the song. Cool intro. I have no other opinion. I've listened to it twice in and out of context, and it refused to leave a lasting impression, in one ear and out the other.
Huh.
I tried on this one, guys. I'm sorry.
Well, I have a bit more to say about that.
By all means.
I think one of the things that strikes me the most is that compared to the previous track, even the one where you are fighting actual space pirates, this has a different instrumentation to it. A different texture that reflects the strangeness of the aliens that are attacking you, but not in the same strange way Pandora's Labyrinth was treated. They basically managed to take the way these aliens are another thing fundamentally different from the gods you've fought against and for before, while also reflecting the fact that they are an organized force, again shown by their very geometric design, which conveniently saves a lot on polygons. And that managed to really show off the fact that this is a whole other deal from what happened before.
This is another track where I end up comparing it to a composer I'm familiar with, which is someone I've brought up in our anime episode called Kotaro Nakagawa,
Okay.
who's done the Gun Sword soundtrack. I prefer the Gun Sword soundtrack personally, which is the one thing from his that I've listened to in the past. But this piece does remind me of the few moments in that anime where he had to score for a more clean sci-fi aesthetic. Because just to go do a quick, brief summary, that the whole thing in that anime is that the world is very Western inspired, but there are some mechas in space from an ancient civilization, and no one has been able to replicate that technology. So when it cuts to those mechas, the soundtrack goes very like clean, futuristic sci-fi, and that's kind of the vibe I got here. When Nakagawa goes clean sci-fi vibes, it goes similar to this one.
Yeah, overall, it's very much fitting for a situation where, in this case, you are doing high ancient fantasy stuff, and suddenly there's the Borg.
You're not wrong. It's lacking a bit in catchphrases, but it's definitely there. Not enough resistance is futiles being thrown around.
In a way, this kind of has the same situation as Dark Pit, where it's a level theme, but it doesn't have as many twists and turns because it's also kind of the theme for this enemy force.
Right.
As depersonalized as it is. Anyway, that's the third arc of this game. And moving on, the next arc happens with the opposite of a bang. Because what happens is that for 3 levels you fight off the alien invaders, even allying with the forces of the underworld, because for all of Hades' evils, he doesn't really gain to have the actual planet harvested in chunks.
Right.
And then you wake up and you are little ring and you possess a girl. And then she drops it and you possess a dog.
And that's why it's dog's theme.
Exactly. Because that's what happens when the ring is passed down from the girl to the dog's mouth. And you can't attack and have to basically navigate your way through a level where another force you haven't fought before attacks, the forces of your guys.
I have mixed feelings about this track.
I like the track for what it is. I like the return of the Spanish guitars and the violins in there. It sounds nice.
I like how it sounds. I am not really fond of how it was used in the game, because it kind of feels like it was used as a bit of a comic relief theme.
A bit.
I mean, to be fair, this game is like, in its English version, 90% comic relief of whatever is happening. With how much they banter all the time.
Yeah, it's a very lighthearted game.
And
I mean, judging by the gameplay videos you gave me.
It's added in the English dub, a lot of it. It's more straight-laced in Japanese, from what I've heard, and I like the English language change, honestly. It has a lot of charm.
It does.
But yeah, so you're a dog, and angels are attacking a city, and you have again the transition between the previous theme and the previous character you controlled, which was this nameless little girl that was just slow and ponderous to control and you couldn't do anything, and the music matched that by being very slow, very kind of like you are trying to push through a thick mist, and then the dog happens to be much more fast and nimble, and that theme as a result is kind of freeing. It's very fancy like that, but also kind of circular. It loops on itself a lot.
It does loop very well. It got a bit of a flamenco vibe, and usually that kind of gets a bit old after a while. They don't always loop very well. This one does loop very well. The song itself, I really like it. It's one of my favorites from the ones you shared with us. I just part of me kind of wishes it wasn't used for a section that feels like comic relief until Pit gets into his own body. Though at the same time, I kind of feel like an actual comedic sounding track would have got a note really fast. So
yeah, but at the same time, I don't think that's a comedy moment. Sure, you're controlling a dog and you sometimes lose control because you're smelling delicious garbage and oh no, the dog is influencing me. But at the same time, you were last time you checked victorious against alien invaders, and suddenly nothing is happening, and your goddess doesn't answer, and you don't have anyone to banter with for the first part. It's a lonely experience compared to the rest of the game, and that's kind of emphasized by how this theme, for all its free instrumentation, is more understated than the much more orchestral soundtrack of the rest of this game. And you say you return to your body. You don't right away. Before you do that, you have to get back in the body of somebody who can actually fight. And the answer to that, which is the last theme for this ground level, happens to be an angry Magnus that comes back, and suddenly he is very annoyed at you because somebody in your body is causing havoc. Turns out all of that is due to attacking the Lunar Sanctum like 5 chapters back, having unleashed an ancient chaos bug that eats God's souls. You know, classic fun shenanigans.
Yep.
Oh right, there's also the fact that I think it's deliberate then to mark the change. They also employed Masafumi Takada instead of one of their more used composer to have a different hand at it and really mark that something's different, something's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can definitely hear that. The song sounds different than the others in a lot of fundamental ways, which, again, as you're pointing out, is clearly the intent.
Exactly. And that's why with the next possession of Magnus, there's not only a return to a theme that's more familiar, because you've literally heard it before on the second stage of the game, but also that there's somebody to banter with again. Which is why, again, it's a very impactful sequence. And that theme has a tendency to stick in my head every now and then. The circular nature of it. And then let's move on to the last track. The Lightning Chariot Base, another ground theme, because I think we've covered mostly the air levels and the interesting parts of what a linear level is.
Yeah.
And then they still somehow find ways to surprise and get some interesting bits in, with Masafumi Takada decided to get weird for a level which has a one-time weird, not even truly antagonist so much as point of resistance. You are entering the essentially garage of the nameless servant of a dead god, and so there's something again different about it, and they really commit to the bit of having instruments and compositions reflecting different cultures and different forces at play. And there's a lot of forces, and the music helps differentiate them from each other. And in this case, well, it's something that's different from anything you faced before again, and there are definitely some instruments that play to that. I think there's some bouzouki, for instance. And there's some... either it is actual throat singing in the background, or instruments or things that are made to sound very much like ones, but that really have set up the stage for something that's very unique, even 19 levels into the game.
Yeah, I listened pretty carefully to the soundtrack that you presented, and I did not hear much at all in the way of live instruments, so I have to assume it's a synth.
Well, the fact that there is a pretty extensive orchestra section on the soundtrack as a whole means it suggests otherwise. Or maybe for this track they went with a more synth composition.
It's entirely possible that I am
sure.
dead wrong on this one, and you just managed to select a bunch of tracks that didn't use live orchestra for the entire time, thus creating a possibly incorrect opinion on my behalf. It's sort of like my cat. I take a lot of pictures of my cat when she's settled in or cuddly, and it kind of creates the idea that she's lazy when she is actually like extremely active and runs around constantly. I feel like we may be in a similar situation here, where the limited exposure I have to the soundtrack as a whole created an impression that may not be correct.
Possible.
So I'm going to retract that statement about it probably being a synth and go with I have no idea. I'd have to re-listen to the song and really listen.
And I have no clear idea either. And maybe it's the selection. I didn't really pick some tracks specifically, but I couldn't just dump the entire soundtrack on your face. Even I am not as cruel.
I mean, you say that, but we've dumped whole concerts on each other's faces, so, you know.
Yeah, but concerts are not the same.
Fair enough.
And it's a big soundtrack. And yeah, no, this track is just the one that lives in my head the most, perhaps, because similar to how we said the dog theme was very circular, this one has also kind of a looping main theme of that.
Yeah. I like the motif a lot.
Going on.
Yeah.
Yes.
It kind of impressed
And,
me with
that's
how well
reflected-
it looped. Because the stage is pretty big. Like, I saw the other gameplay videos, and there's more breaks on the music for the other stages. This one goes with the same song for a long time.
Yeah, to the point where they actually remark on that. Like, one of the running jokes in this stage is that you tell your partner, which in this stage is Viridi and not Palutena, because Palutena is possessed, and Viridi decided to pick you up after you returned into your body from the Ring of Chaos. Simple plot. And you... Essentially, there's a running joke where basically the level is structured as main tower floors and then large stairways on the outside. And the more you climb that tower from the stairways on the outside, the more Pete becomes annoying, asking, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" incessantly. It is one of the larger levels in the game.
And again, the sound doesn't feel repetitive, which is
I think part of that is that the theme reflects not necessarily the sameness, but the fact that you are ascending and progressing all throughout.
Mm-hmm.
And it really helps drive you forward and upward in a way that's less heroic than a lot of themes before, because you don't have your usual allies, and you are still pushing through.
Yeah, it's less of a heroic theme and more of a battle theme where you're winning.
Yeah, it's a slow struggle, and you are edging again and again until you get what you want, which in this case is pillaging a guy's ride.
And
GTA
suddenly
happens
Grand Theft Chariot.
in-
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say GTA apparently happens in ancient Greece as well.
Yeah,
Thankfully, Pete doesn't get those 5 stars from the cops in the corner.
I mean, judging by the amount of stuff you have to shoot, it kind of feels like he's living in 5-star land, so...
although technically you can have less things to shoot, there's an adjustable difficulty thing. Which is part of why the tracks on the linear levels are synced to the progression in the level more than individual enemy appearances. They couldn't have those bits in because on some difficulty you could have 2 enemies and some others you could have 7.
Which is obviously a big difference in terms of what you're capable of, so yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly. And yeah, that's the final track I reflected and picked because even the later arc, because there's another story arc, you still have to clean up after Hades after all. But there's not really any new development that really feel deserves mention as much as what we've covered in the episode so far.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's quite a ride, and the diversity in the soundtracks, in the composition, in the composers, really reflects that it's less one story and more 4 stories bundled into one.
Yeah, this game sounds wild, and this soundtrack is really a treasure. I've never deep dived into this one before, but I'm glad you put this in front of us, because this led to some discoveries that I'm very happy with.
Yeah, and I'm very happy that you say that, because it's a very good game, but one that hasn't been as widespread as more mainstay series. And I think it deserves the recognition, musically and in the game itself, because it's got a ton of charm, ton of interesting elements to it, and a lot of content as well.
I guess the moral
Also, the multiplayer was surprisingly good.
I guess the moral of the story is, can we have a switchboard, please?
Yes, that would be amazing. And with a sensible control scheme.
That would be nice for everything you just described.
I think you're asking too much of Nintendo if you're asking for a sensible control scheme.
Hey, it works for Splatoon. Speaking of other games, how about we move on to Music Arcade Now Playing.
Alright, you're gonna get the intro music this time around.
He has taken over the podcast after all.
Clearly.
Exactly.
Well, in that case, why don't you go ahead and lead us off, because usually I'm the one who does.
Well, I thought I'd take a brief break from talking about games I've played, but if you want, so
No,
alright.
I'll go ahead and start.
Alright.
Okay, so
ahead,
we're going to save the best for last on this one. So I've played a few different games over the course of this week. I've been playing some Rogue Genesia. Genesia? I don't know. And it's a Vampire Survivors clone, but with some very interesting gameplay mechanics added in. It's got a Slay the Spire style map. It's a lot more mathematics-based. Its visual representation is not Castlevania. It's Super Ghouls and Ghosts, which I think is cool.
Ooh, now you have my interest.
The music is there. It's there. I tried to find a YouTube video of it, and I couldn't even find that. It's literally mostly just drum beats. The music is very sparse.
There is something.
I'm sorry?
We can confirm there is something.
There is something. The music does exist. It is not silence, which is good.
Notes and sound waves have happened.
Correct. The next one I played was Alan Wake's American Nightmare, which was the originally Xbox 360 spin-off pseudo-sequel of Alan Wake, a game that had a great story and characters and terrible gameplay, so in many ways it reminded me of Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Shots fired.
I will continue calling that FF7 Remake's gameplay is for crap. I will always do that. It breaks a lot of rules of 3D action games in ways that don't work.
And I will
we'll
continue to make the
that
joke
later.
of shots fired.
Fair enough. And like everything that Remedy seems to do, they hire a band called Poets of the Fall to be their in-game band, the Old Gods of Asgard. And yeah, the song's good. It's
deliciously cheesy.
It is deliciously cheesy, but that's clearly the intent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't much like
especially coming from me, that is a pure-hearted compliment.
Yeah, we got you. Yeah, I'm not a fan of metal songs with narrated intros, possibly because I was a fan of Rhapsody as a teenager, and they did that way too much.
They do that a lot.
So after the narrated bit, it is really fun.
Yes.
Really cool
Once
song.
the guitars kick in, things are good. But I will fully agree that the opening narration just makes me roll my eyes. But whatever.
That's a good song to ride down the road at night.
Yep. Or, defend an observatory from hordes of Taken, that too. The gameplay in American Nightmare was much smoother. It was a lot more combat-oriented, which I think worked to its credit. This isn't music-related, but it felt like a more fun video game, but the characters and story just weren't as strong. So, 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
Yes.
Yep.
That's what I've heard from it as well.
Yeah. Then, of course, Arknights has a new event, Stulta Navis, the Ship of Fools. Very cool soundtrack. There's a couple of songs on here that I'm half convinced Goshiin had a hand in. It's got a lot of his, specific sweeps and bleeps and blurbs. I like it. I don't really have much of an opinion on it because, peek behind the curtain, I forgot to add it until we were in the middle of recording this episode.
Which is why I also don't have much of an opinion on it yet.
Right.
Same here.
So, yep. So unfortunately, that's just where we're going to leave that one. And then, of course...
It's good, probably.
It is good. I've been playing the event and listening to the music in the event. It's good.
We can confirm there is a song.
Yeah.
We just cannot confirm the quality.
I think you'll like it. I hope you do, but we won't be able to talk about that till next week. And
What
then...
quality we can confirm, though.
You're welcome for the suggestion, / I'm sorry we put you up to that song. We don't know.
Okay, that was a weird take.
Good.
It's probably
good. But, covering our
It's Arknights. How many times have Arknights put out bad music? Let's be honest here. Trust me, if they did, I would have been much stronger about my statement about it.
No, what we are sure is very good.
Oh my god, it's actually here. So, Tactics Ogre Reborn is a game that actually exists, and I've been playing it, and I streamed it for 8 hours yesterday, and I don't stream anything for 8 hours in a row.
Miracles do happen.
And miracles do happen, and my god, the reorchestrated soundtrack is so good!
So good.
So good. I could just dump this entire soundtrack on people and be like, just listen to it, and you would not regret it.
At first you did, before I pointed out that YouTube Premium lets you unbury some playlist search results.
Okay, in my defense, the only reason I had a timed entry, this was the song I wanted to play, but you're right. No, the search result didn't help. I should probably get onto YouTube Premium. I've been watching YouTube so much on my Apple TV, and I'm just getting commercials, and it's driving me crazy. Anyway, this is not relevant. So, there were a few songs that I was kind of bouncing between. I thought I was good to go with Blasphemous Experiment for a while, which was the song, which is the theme of Naibeth Obnilord, which is the same theme played during his fight in FF14, and then I just rolled my eyes and went, we've heard enough of that.
Except the way it's reinstrumentated.
Oh, yeah. Reorchestrated is the word you're looking for.
Reorchestrated, yes, that's a word.
There you go.
Good. Except the way it's reorchestrated is incredible. The choir is more creepy. There's even a bit of horror movie strings in the background at some point, and it's so good.
It's so good, but instead I went with one that's an even better remix of an already incredible song, and that's Avila Hanya.
At music from a tactics game that is incredibly genre-defining music should not be able to also remind me of Killer Instinct. But here we are. I don't think that's allowed, but I'm not calling the cops on it.
I think Tactics Ogre at this point, for daring to exist in the 21st century with mouse controls. Oh god, I love that it has mouse controls. I think it earns a pass, right?
Yeah.
It could do whatever
the right to. I was gonna say it gets the right to do whatever it wants with the soundtrack. Does it want to play the Mario Brothers theme on an ukulele in the middle of a battle? It can do it. Just go.
To be
for
fair, the Mario Brothers theme very much suited for ukuleles.
I would agree there. Yeah.
Just not very much for tactics RPG, but they
probably
got
not.
it right.
But Mario vs. Rabbids does exist, and maybe it's in there somewhere.
It might be.
Outplayed.
Anyway,
Tactics Ogre OST good.
Good.
Very good.
I think very, very good even undersells it, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yes.
This is probably the definitive interpretation of already an incredible soundtrack, which is a hell of a thing to say given the circumstances with Square lately. Like
I am thinking back to the FF6 remake soundtrack where there were some good slight improvements and some more disputable choices.
And then there was the opera.
There, from what I've listened, it's basically here is some genre-defining soundtrack now with added gravitas and impeccable instrumentation and just the pure distilled essence of what was felt all those years ago.
I was a little surprised, but it makes sense to see that Base Escape, which is Hitoshi Takimoto's music production company, actually getting a front of credits splash screen.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like given the amount of work, given the amount of work put into reorchestrating the soundtrack, earned.
Yes. Also glad the voice actors that were also an edition of Reborn got the Time in the Sun right from the start.
Yeah, they also made opening credits, which one means it's a full SAG production, and two means it's a full cinematic production, which is, chef's kiss.
And given that the plot can be a bit hard to follow sometimes, having the voice work supported is very helpful.
Yes, and
on top of just being good.
I mentioned Naibeth Obnilord a little earlier. Keith Silverstein makes an awesome Naibeth Obnilord, and I'm very happy to hear him.
Yeah.
And that's it for me.
Alright, then from one game that has some Keith Silverstein in it to another, Genshin Impact has some new content that isn't a full zone or full nation or something like that, but there is a new big boss fight, and it is better than the entirety of the region the guy comes from.
Alright.
It's Scaramouche, which is an antagonist that has been set up since 2 years ago, finally getting a payoff with a boss fight where he is in a giant mech.
Does he do the Fandango with a giant mech? I'm sorry, it's the obvious joke, but I can't not say it.
Oh no, don't worry, everybody does.
I know.
Those sort of joke.
Yeah, no, it's the obvious joke. I just can't not say it.
Yeah. And the game decided to go the other way and decided if we're going to have a torn apart guy with parental issues inside of a giant purple mech. We're going to name the achievement for beating the fight for the first time after an Evangelion reference.
I was about to say, all right, cool.
And
That
yeah,
tracks.
no, as far as the track itself go, it has those technological sounds that make sense for fighting a giant mech, on foot no less, and also the Italian choir, because he is part of the Italian-themed Russian mafia. And,
What? Okay.
It's
Yeah,
a
I guess.
thing. Well, more accurately, the Commedia dell'arte themed Russian mafia.
Right.
Right. So basically, the Corleonevich or Corleoneovs, something like that.
Yeah,
There's
Vich
a
means
joke
son
there.
of. Yeah.
Of, I think of actually means son of as well. Anyway, we're going way too far with this attempt at a joke.
Yes.
Yeah, and but yeah, I really love the voice they use for it, which fits his kind of youthful but inside of a mech, so there's some distortion to his voice, and reminds me weirdly of another theme from a completely unrelated game that's certainly accidental, but there was this track for the first encounter in Beyond Good and Evil, which had a lot of kind of whispering monster voices in the background egging you on, and there's part of it besides or around the main driving voice, which provide a lot of contrast and gives the antagonist a bit more of the haunted nature he is at this point of the scenario. It's all very good, and again, I wish the rest of the Inazuma themes were this well constructed, including the main fight against the Raiden Shogun. That's better than this.
Wait, a fight
Well, then.
against the Raiden Shogun? I thought she was a character you could actually get.
Yeah,
Okay.
you also find against Tartaglia and you can play him.
Okay, never mind. I forgot what kind of game I was playing here.
To be fair, for Signora, they held themselves back.
Fair enough.
Moving on, I played quite a bit of Harvestella as well.
How is that?
And terrible.
Ouch!
Glad you ask. Yeah, no, that's some of the worst 3D action RPG combat I've played in recent years.
Wow.
Maybe one of the worst impressions since the Secret of Mana remake.
That kind of explains why you picked a song that feels like a requiem for the game.
No, actually, it's a requiem for something else entirely, because as much as the farming is mediocre and disconnected from the JRPG action gameplay, which is just kinda bad, the game's presentations, graphics, and music are excellent. Absolutely impeccable on that aspect. The soundtrack is annoyingly hard to find. I presume Square Enix is still cracking down hard on the upload, so if by the time we upload this episode the music reference is gone from the playlist, that wouldn't be too surprising. But you know, that track is what is a dungeon theme for an underwater path, where sirens lived once, but they have all essentially sacrificed themselves, leading to this surrounding voice of them lingering in the area and driving boats to their doom. Meaning that the haunting choirs that have this requiem kind of aspect to them is not only pretty neat, it's also diegetic.
Okay.
So, very cool track for a game that is... I think the best way I've described it as I was still playing it was simply to use a quote from Knives Out. Makes no damn sense. Compels me, though.
Fair enough.
I'll less onion soon. And then we have the Valkyrie Elysium to Galen's Tactics Ogre. Because that's something I've been waiting for a while, and that I am so very happy getting my hands on.
Oh, yeah. No, I really enjoyed that game. I played it on the PlayStation a month or two ago. Yeah, it's good. I still need to play the DLC. The Seraphic Gate just released on the PlayStation version. I don't know if it's on the Steam version
yet or not. Exactly.
It
released at the same time the Steam version released.
Oh, cool.
Which is the one I'm playing. Yeah. Also, they've added 2 new difficulty levels, just in case you want to flex. I'm playing on hard, which was the hardest at launch, and I'm liking the difficulty balance a lot.
Okay.
And I have a lot to say on the game, so I will hold back, but I've been loving what I've seen so far, 3 hours in merely, and First I wanted to pick a track that oddly reminded me of Blasphemous Experiments of all things, which was just a field theme, but given how decayed the world is, that's kind of fitting. However, I picked the boss theme because first, subtlety is for coward. That is my motto. And because I think it shows for the more recent Sakuraba works. That's right, you thought I was out Sakuraba, but no.
I believe I made this joke when I talked about the game a couple weeks ago. Or a couple episodes ago.
Well, I'm making it again, damn it.
Understood. Makes sense. Anyway, please continue.
I think this one is interesting in that it shows that compared to when Valkyrie Profile 1 and 2 came out, he has had some experience. Sakuraba has progressed, and I think it's fair to say that in fighting the giant gods, there's a bit of Dark Souls in there.
Yes, I did hear that very much. When I first started playing it, I thought the game was more of a Souls-like than it turned out to be. It turned out to have a lot more influence from, Bayonetta and games like that. But hearing,
it gives you a lot of tools.
It does. And hearing the boss themes, yes, it's very Dark Souls mode. So, which is unsurprising given the size and comparative power of these bosses.
Yeah, exactly, and the sense of scale, which is very similar, because for all the godly powers you wield, the scale of enemies compared to you is very similar, which is why this boss that's much taller is allowed to have a little bit of crushing force behind his theme as a treat. So far very happy with what I've heard and what I've played. There's a suitable atmosphere of crushing despair, which is just how I like my Valkyrie stuff.
Understandable. I mean, that is kind of the selling point of the game.
That's the brand.
Hopefully.
And the Enheriars have more backstory than any of them in Valkyrie Profile 2 ever had. So I'm very happy with that, because that was the main wrongdoing of that game.
I would agree there, but I'd also say they also weren't the focus like they were in the first one.
Yes. I understand why they did the change, I just don't like it.
I was fine with it since I considered it a different experience, and the difference between the two soundtracks really also made that clear, but we could absolutely get into a whole Valkyrie Profile episode comparing the two main games.
Oh, even 5 games now.
Well, that's why I said the main ones. I'm not counting Covenant of the Plume, since that was largely a bunch of remixes from the first game anyway.
Yeah. And same for Anatomia, of course.
Yes. Although Anatomia had a great mix of Mission to Deep Space, and I'm really hoping... I don't know what to expect on Seraphicate. I'm hoping to hear Mission from Deep Space, but I gotta be honest, considering how different this soundtrack is to the other Valkyrie games, who knows?
Exactly. And if they can keep us on our toes, all the better.
Fair enough.
Well, that's it for today. We shall be back soon. No promises about less Sakuraba next time, though. As always, you can check the music we've talked about as well as how to get in contact with us in the episode description. See you next time on Music Sakuraba Music Arcade.
Bye, everybody.
See you next time.